Hello watch enthusiasts. Now at present Baselworld 2017 is running, and I've been very lucky to be here for the first 3 days. Now, today I'd like to talk about the various dive watches released, and in particular the more interesting ones, because it's very difficult to cover the full extent of releases due to the sheer number, so I would like to focus on the most notable and my favourites. Now, the one watch which is really unavoidable in terms of discussion is the new Rolex Sea Dweller. Now, this replaces the Sea Dweller 4000, which was becoming a real favourite, I think, among Rolex collectors, due to the fact that it was a very different watch to a Submariner, with narrower lugs, as well as having a much increased water resistance of 1220 metres. It also didn't have a Cyclops, but did have the date, and had a fully graduated bezel. Now, the new case is larger at 43mm rather than the original 40, and this has again raised quite a few eyebrows, because it really is a very different size to previous more classic sizes at 40mm, though it still isn't as large as the much larger 44mm deep sea. That said, though, in terms of the difference between this and a deep sea, now I think the line becomes more blurred due to the size similarity. Inside the watch there is the new Rolex caliber 3235. Which is a step forwards in terms of Rolex calibers and the engineering and design going into these movements. So this watch has, again, an automatic perpetual movement from Rolex, but the difference here is that this retains the chronometer status of previous Rolex movements, of the +2 -2 certification. But in addition to that, it now has a 70-hour power reserve, bringing it into line with Tudor movements, which have a similar length of power reserve. Now, due to a new type of hairspring, this watch is also 10 times more shock resistant than an equivalent standard hairspring, which does fit with the professional aspects of this watch, in keeping with the larger size and the fully graduated ceramic bezel. The two most substantial changes to this watch, though, are in the dial and the crystal. And here we see on the dial a single line of red text saying Sea Dweller. And this harks back to the original red Sea Dwellers with a single line of text, which have become extremely rare due to the fact that most of these dials were replaced with double red dials. But even the double reds are worth 25 or 30,000 pounds, so it is quite remarkable to see them produce a watch at 10 with this feature. This is particularly surprising because Rolex almost never produces watches that commemorate previous efforts or achievements. Or if they do, they have a certain green aspect to them due to that being the colour of Rolex. So it is rather peculiar seeing this watch, but I think we're certainly all very pleased to see a red text Sea Dweller. One aspect which is likely to draw less interest and less support is the inclusion of a Cyclops over the date now. And this is something which I personally don't particularly like, because I find it breaks up the crystal and doesn't make it as attractive in terms of its aesthetics. But again, it does magnify the date 2.5 times to make it a little more legible. Though I do like the fact that the old Sea Dwellers didn't have this, so I would have liked to see Rolex remove this from the crystal and leave it a simple plain flat crystal to better commemorate the original. On the side of this watch, as per usual with the Sea Dweller, we see a helium escape valve, which has very much become a staple of this lineup. And of course it's an aspect of the watch which very, very few people will use, but it certainly does show Rolex's attention to this professional market which they do appeal to. Now, the next watch on this list, which is also a very interesting release from the Rolex group, is the new Tudor Black Bay Steel. And this is very much in keeping with the Black Bays as a 200-metre dive watch, with very classic style and a very old-fashioned Rolex and Tudor design. Again, we have the brushed tops to the lugs and those polished sides, making it a very classic choice. But the watch now features a very simple aesthetic, and they've lost the gilded aspects of the black version, and used a brushed steel inlay for the bezel rather than the black painted version. Of course, this watch retains the MT5612 automatic in-house movement from Tudor, which is of course a chronometer and has that 70-hour power reserve, which is so practical for owners of these watches. Also, it retains that little red triangle at 12 o'clock, which is rather a nice touch and plays in well with the red text on the dial. And also we see a date aperture at 3 o'clock with a white date wheel. And I think this is a practical choice for those who want to wear a Tudor on a daily basis, and want the extra added functionality and extra practicality of having a date displayed on the dial. As ever with the Black Bay, we see those very beautifully finished snowflake-style hands, and that typical Submariner dial. and this watch is presented on either their riveted bracelet, which has gained a great deal of popularity in recent years, following last year's release of the in-house version of this watch. But also this watch is available on a sort of a khaki olive NATO strap, which passes through the lugs themselves, and is quite a practical and an attractive choice. Of course, the quality of this extra woven strap is really excellent, and these are, of course, produced by the same company that make the robes for the Vatican. So they really are quite remarkable quality and are very durable as well as being beautifully finished. Now, the final watch from Tudor this year in terms of dive watches was the Tudor Black Bay Steel and Gold. And you may have noticed that they've produced rather a number of Black Bays this year, and I would agree, but I shan't comment on that in this video. I'll probably talk about that in my favourites from Baselworld. And this is, as the name would imply, a two-tone version of the Black Bay. So we have a gold-capped centre links on the bracelet, as well as having a gold-capped crown, and then a solid gold bezel. Now, having the gold-capped aspects of this watch may seem somewhat counterproductive, because in the long run it may rub off, but this is a very thick layer of gold over the steel. The purposes of this are twofold, in that having solid gold centre links on the bracelet, which are incidentally brushed, contrary to other Rolexes. But in this case, it allows the bracelet to be far more durable in terms of stretching over the years, due to the soft nature of gold. Having a steel core is really an advantage. Also, the crown is gold capped additionally, which again may seem like a point of weakness for the gold covering, but is very thickly coated and does save costs for the buyer. The dial and hands also feature gold accents, along with having the date placed at the 3 o'clock position, courtesy of that MT5612 movement with the COSC chronometer certification. Also, the bezel features gold accents around it, again adding to the full addition of a gold aspect to this watch and perhaps a more luxurious feel. Now, in terms of the market segment of this watch, it does make sense upon reflection, on the basis that this watch, with similar specifications now that it has the in-house Tudor movement, does cost a full third of the price of the equivalent two-tone Rolex. So I really do see why this would make sense as far as a choice for Tudor to make as a spin-off of their Black Bay lineup. Now, from Breitling, we see some very substantial developments in terms of changes to the Super Ocean heritage, a real favourite among collectors, which of course commemorates the older models from the Super Ocean lineup. And they've retained the 42 and 46mm versions of this watch and the chronograph version in that 46mm size, but now they have several versions with different colour schemes that were previously not seen. So we still have the blue and the black, but now there's a black bezel with a white dial version, which I think is particularly attractive. Also, the date is now placed at 6 o'clock on all models, which I think is a really helpful improvement over the date which was placed at 3 o'clock on the 42mm previously. In terms of technical changes, the case still remains fully polished, but now we have a ceramic bezel in the place of the previous painted version, or anodised aluminium version, which means it's much more scratch resistant and will retain a better shine than previous anodised versions, which tended to scratch very easily. Also, the hands have been changed, whereby the sword style hand has been widened in the case of the minute hand, and the hour hand now has a strake down the middle of it to further emphasise that arrow shape. Now, where the movement is concerned, there have been various developments in this watch, and the most pronounced one is the fact that the movement has been changed entirely. Of course, the size of the watch has remained the same, but the movement has been changed from an ETA 2824 base movement to a Tudor movement. And this may seem like a very strange thing, seeing as Breitling and the Rolex Group have been rivals, but at the moment there's a movement exchange program going on between both of them, including the movement for the new Tudor chronograph, the Black Bay chronograph, but in this case Tudor have developed a version of the MT5612, seen in the new Black Bays, for this watch. As with the ETA that preceded it, this watch is chronometer grade, and its movement is very much set to those rigorous tests that Breitling put their watches through. But this now features a 70-hour power reserve, making the watch altogether more practical for the wearer who wants to put the watch down at the beginning of the weekend and pick it up on Monday, with the watch still running and on time, which is again a helpful feature in the new watch. Now, at Omega this year, there has really been a fantastic development in the dive watch segment, and I think releases have come as just the perfect models to really impress the public and the press alike. Now, this year is the 60th anniversary of 1957, which was, of course, a very important year for Omega, with the first Seamaster, the first Speedmaster, and the first Railmaster. Now, though the Railmaster hasn't been produced for a while now, and of course it's being remade this year, as you will see in my other videos, the Seamaster has gained a great deal of attention as a limited edition version, which will run alongside the more modern 300 that's been seen in the new Bond films. So this version features a far more simplistic design, a far more minimal design, except the bezel is very much true to the original, with that fairly fussy style of loom pip, very much separated from the painted section of the bezel. Now, to the untrained eye, this watch looks exactly like the original, and this is of course designed to be the case. The watch features even a closed case back to better imitate the original, and has the same dimensions as the original watch. The only real change comes in the clasp, which has been modified to be more resilient and more sturdy in this modern world. The loom pip on the second hand is also gone, as with the original, and we have those beautiful broad arrow hands seen on the original watch. Also, the dial is simply painted to give the impression of an older style of dial, whereby these dials were simply printed and then loom was applied by hand, which I think does add a very interesting and quite beautiful aesthetic to this watch, being a far more delicate approach to a watch. Now, despite retaining the looks and in many cases the same materials as the original, the CK2913, this watch does retain those 300 meters of water resistance expected from a modern watch, and also this has the master coaxial chronometer 8806 movement, which is one of the coaxial movements made in-house by Omega. Although one can't see it in this watch due to the closed caseback, it is quite a movement and is again anti-magnetic as per usual with the Omega watches. Now, the other interesting watch from Omega this year in the dive watch segment was the Seamaster Planet Ocean Big Blue, and this follows on after last year's Deep Black Planet Ocean, a black ceramic version of their very successful Seamaster Planet Ocean, being the higher end section of the Seamaster range. And this features the same features as that watch, apart from the colour of that ceramic case. The ceramic case still being zirconium dioxide, but this time tinted or coloured blue to form this universally blue watch, which is rather overwhelming at first. But I can certainly understand why this would make a very interesting change for a collector of Seamasters. This also features the GMT hand on the dial, along with the 24-hour scale on the chapter ring of the dial, making for an easily kept second time zone. Of course, this blue is very heavily contrasted by the use of orange on the dial numerals, as well as the chapter ring and that bezel, and also on the detailing on the strap. Of course, the bezel insert is that liquid metal insert that we saw last year, and again with that rubber insert between 0 and 15 to give that very vibrant orange in contrast with the blue, which I think works extremely well and matches that orange Omega symbol on the crown. Of course, this watch doesn't come on a bracelet, unlike the other versions of the Planet Ocean, simply because a ceramic bracelet would be far too brittle, and could crack and would be a very expensive fix. So instead of that, we have this very nicely finished woven surfaced rubber strap with a zirconium dioxide blue clasp and deployant with a dive extension to make this watch a very interesting and very different option as far as dive watches go. Housed within this gargantuan 45.5mm by almost 18mm case, we see the Omega Caliber 8906, which is of course a master coaxial chronometer movement from Omega, with the 15,000 Gauss anti-magnetism, and also with that special certification by Metas of the accuracy of this watch, to make for a very practical and very usable sports watch in the field. In the dive watch segment, certainly 3 watches from Seiko have taken the media by storm, and 2 of these are from the new autonomous Grand Seiko, which is of course separate now from Seiko, allowing them to write simply Grand Seiko on the dial rather than Seiko as well as this. And they've released the SBGH 255 and the SBGH 257. And these are 2 watches from the High Beat series, which really do complete the Grand Seiko lineup in providing them with a professional dive watch. Now, previously we've seen the somewhat less professional spring drive dive watches from Grand Seiko, with their power reserves and 200 meter water resistance. but we haven't seen these very professional dive watches from them, so it's very interesting to see a 600-metre dive watch from this brand. Now, these watches feature the same design language as previous Grand Seiko divers, however they are now much more angular, and also feature 46.9 by 17mm cases, making them very large timepieces, but nonetheless elegant. They also have these beautifully finished cathedral and pointer arrow-style hands, which are very, very legible against that blue background, or the black background of the non-limited edition version. Now, inside these watches, they do feature the high-beat 36,000 beat per hour Grand Seiko in-house movements, which are again extremely accurate and very, very well made. These watches are also saturation dive watches with no helium escape valve, but rather a case that is impenetrable to helium, which is, I personally find, the more elegant approach to this problem faced by divers. And I appreciate the fact that Seiko have taken the time and the effort to produce a watch capable of such feats. Also, this watch features a type of extension on the clasp, which is ratcheting, to give a real perfect fit over any sort of diving equipment. Of course, this watch does come in two versions. So there's a black dial version with gold accents on the hands and the indices, and this version is the non-limited version, and will come in as with the blue version at around the $12,000 mark, and $12,100 for this model, while the blue dial version, which doesn't have these gold accents but has this beautiful dial, is $12,300. It's also worth pointing out there are only 500 of the blue dial versions that are going to be produced, making it really a very limited version and one which will be very much sought after. Now, from Seiko themselves, there is the new re-edition of the 62 MAS, and this version features the caliber 8935, which is one of the high-grade Seiko calibers, and runs at 4 Hz, is a 26 joule movement with 60 hours of power reserve. So it's a very competent and interesting movement for this watch. This watch is also nice and slim like the original version, which, of course, the 62 MAS was the first dive watch released by Seiko in 1965, and in this case has been replicated beautifully in this 39.9 by 14.1mm case. It also features the Dia shield from Seiko, which of course protects the surface of the steel from scratches. Of course, I think this watch will be a superb success with the beautiful finishing on the dial, and those very elegant lume plots which match the original almost perfectly. This, I suspect, will have a similar appeal as the Marine Master 300, which really did take the market by storm and is still a very popular watch. This is a limited edition of 2,000 pieces and has its water resistance up from 150 metres to 200, bringing it really into a more modern style of dive watch. Now, the price for this watch will be €3,800, which seems quite high, but for a limited edition of this type, I can certainly understand this price. I would also like to point out the inherent price difference between this watch and the newer Seamaster 300 from Omega, which I think does put this watch's price into perspective as a very interesting timepiece. Now, from Blancpain, the most interesting release has been this new version of the 50 Fathoms, which is called the Tribute 50 Fathoms Mil-Spec. And this is a version which commemorates the older dive watches produced specifically for the French special ops and naval units by Blancpain when this was commissioned as the first dive watch with a rotating bezel. Now, this differs from the more modern versions, as it doesn't share the sword-style hands with modern versions, but rather has the more old-fashioned straight hands, which are in the long term less legible, but do fit with that original aesthetic better. Now, this also features a very simplified dial, with a very simple layout, very similar to that of the dial I personally have on my Seiko 55 Fathoms, of course an homage to this watch. The date has also been placed as a practical touch at the 4:30 position to really remove it from any sort of cluttering position on the dial. Also, the writing on the dial is very simple, with just the Blancpain logo, their name and 50 Fathoms. Really does fit with the simple military aesthetic this timepiece is appealing to. The dial is very beautifully sunbursted in this black finish, and at 6 o'clock we see this humidity indicator, which is true to the original watch, as the red section on the bottom was for reference, while the top version would turn red if humidity was present within the case, allowing one to immediately identify the fact the case was breached. The movement inside this watch is the in-house Blancpain 1150 caliber, and this doesn't follow in the path of the bathyscaphe movements, which are also used in the larger version of the 50 Fathoms, which are the 1315 version, And due to the 40mm case of this watch, which is substantially smaller than the standard 50 fathoms at 44mm or 45, depending on where it's measured, this watch comes in a far more reasonable size. Also, this case has very minute crown guards around the crown just to represent the protection and resilience of these timepieces. Of course, only 500 pieces of this watch are actually being made, making this a very rare piece with its beautifully finished sapphire domed bezel, which is of course not terribly fit for rugged and heavy abuse, but is a very nice touch and a very nice nod, I suppose, to previous watches. Of course, as ever, this watch is a 300-metre diver from Blancpain, making it again a very reliable watch to be used for swimming or diving. Of course, it would be a very brave idea to take one of these diving considering their very limited run, but nonetheless, this is an interesting watch to own, and certainly an interesting one to add to any collection of vintage dive watches. Now, the next watch I'd like to talk about is a watch from a brand called Monta. Now, this is an American-based brand that produce quite an interesting dive watch, which was released a few months ago, and that was the Ocean King, which was a 300-metre diver with an Eterna 3909 calibre. And this raised a certain degree of controversy due to the quite expensive $3,500 price point of this watch. That said, though, having handled the watch, I was very impressed by the quality, and I must say I was pleased to see the new version of this watch, which was now adjusted and renamed the SkyQuest, retaining those 300 metres of water resistance, but now adding the use of a GMT bezel and hand to the dial, as well as having a full chaptering with the GMT indications. Now, this is a 40mm watch with a ceramic bezel and GMT functions, as I've said, but this does include diving features, notably the strength of lume on the dial and the hands, in addition to that GMT hand, which really does sink away from the rest of the watch when one needs to use it for particular timing purposes, but then it's very practical for the traveller. And I think this watch competes very, very well with more expensive watches such as the Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean GMT, as these are also chronometers. Obviously, they incorporate features which this watch doesn't have, but I think at half the price, this is very much a good and an interesting bet. I would say that really this watch competes extremely well in terms of quality and finishing with the Tudors of today, and notably the case design is very much original and is Monta's own design, which is a nice feature when a lot of watches are veering towards homages these days. So it is a nice thing to see a brand new company producing watches at a higher price point, but to a very high level of quality, and with a very reliable, robust, and a very accurate movement from Eterna. Anyway, I'll conclude this video here on a picture of the Doxa Sub 300 50th anniversary model, which, though was released at Baselworld 2016, I got to look at this Baselworld, and I must say is quite a beautiful piece, with a fantastic domed crystal. Anyway, I'll conclude the video there, but do please like, share and subscribe if you did enjoy this video, and would like to see more content on this channel. Also, do please go and have a look at the various other videos I've made about Baselworld, if you'd like to learn about the various other watches released in different categories. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.